M-Navy Signal reporting. The silence of the Black Sea was shattered when Ukraine turned patience into precision. Hours ticked by as Russian commanders raised their glasses, confident, careless, unaware that they were standing on the edge of history. Ukraine's strategic patience turned Russia's celebration into a catastrophe, a masterstroke of timing that revealed not only military precision, but psychological depth. The operation was not rushed, not improvised, but carefully calculated to wait for the exact moment when the Russian commanders would be most vulnerable. In war, timing can be more decisive than numbers, and Ukraine proved that it understood this principle at the highest level. By waiting, they forced their enemy into a false sense of security, allowing them to believe the danger had passed, that the night would be quiet, that the sea would remain under their control. This waiting game was not just about gathering intelligence, but about breaking morale before the first missile was ever launched. It was about showing the enemy that they could be watched, tracked, anticipated, and struck down at the very moment they felt safest. Such an act requires discipline. And discipline is the difference between chaos and victory. Ukrainian forces knew that pulling the trigger too soon would have wasted the opportunity to send a message far beyond the battlefield, a message that would echo in every war room from Moscow to Washington. They held back with nerves of steel, and in doing so turned an ordinary strike into an event that would be remembered as a turning point. This is not just warfare on a tactical level, but warfare as psychological theater, in which the enemy becomes an audience to their own downfall. The decision to wait for Russian commanders to gather in celebration was not a coincidence, but a strategy meant to magnify the effect of the attack. Commanders are not just officers, they are the minds of the war machine, the ones who plan, order, and direct the flow of battle. To strike when they are together is to strike at the brain of the enemy force. And to do it at the moment they are most distracted multiplies the impact. It is a reminder that in modern conflict, victory does not always go to the side with more ships, more guns, or more soldiers, but to the side that can think faster, plan deeper, and strike smarter. The destruction of the floating fortress was therefore more than a physical loss. It was a psychological blow that told the entire Russian fleet that nowhere was safe, no schedule was hidden, no command was beyond reach. Every officer who heard the news would now wonder if they too were being watched, if every toast they made could be their last. That is the kind of fear that slows decisions, clouds judgment, and changes the course of a campaign. Patience is a weapon in itself, and Ukraine wielded it with precision. It takes courage to wait when you have the means to strike. Every hour of delay must have been filled with tension, every report from surveillance analyzed, every movement of the enemy tracked in detail. The longer they waited, the higher the risk that the enemy might change plans, disperse, or strengthen their defenses. But Ukraine accepted that risk. They knew that waiting would turn a strike into a statement, and they were willing to gamble everything on timing. When the moment finally came, they unleashed destruction with clinical efficiency. Missiles flew, explosions tore through steel, fire lit up the night sky. In seconds, the celebration turned to chaos. The laughter turned to screams, and the pride of the Russian Navy was engulfed in flames. The contrast between the joy of the celebration and the violence of the strike made the impact even more dramatic, searing it into memory like a scar. This act was also a message to allies and enemies alike. To Ukraine's supporters, it was proof that aid, intelligence, and training were not in vain, that the fight was far from over, and that Ukraine was not just surviving, but striking back with sophistication. To adversaries, it was a warning that complacency is dangerous, that arrogance can be fatal, and that Ukraine has the capability to change the course of battle in a single night. Strategic patience turned into a weapon of influence, shaping not just the battlefield, but the narrative of the war. It reminded the world that Ukraine was not merely reacting to aggression, but actively shaping events. This was not just a battle won but a lesson delivered, a demonstration that the war could still surprise, that the balance of power was not fixed, and that the spirit of resistance was as fierce as ever. The strike on the floating fortress sent shockwaves across the Black Sea, a moment that tore through the silence of the night and turned the calm waters into a theater of fire. It was not merely the destruction of a warship, but the collapse of a symbol, the unraveling of a piece of Russian naval pride before the eyes of the world. In war, some targets are chosen not only for their tactical value, but for the message they send, and this was one of those moments. The fortress represented security, dominance, and control, and in a single series of strikes, that illusion was shattered. Explosions lit up the horizon like a storm, each blast echoing across the waves, carrying with it the realization that no stronghold is invincible. The shock was not limited to the battlefield. It spread instantly to every level of command. Every vessel still afloat, and every soldier who thought the sea belonged to them. Fear travels faster than fire, and fear was now riding the waves. The psychological effect of such a strike cannot be overstated. War is as much about breaking the will of the enemy as it is about destroying their assets. And when a fortress falls, it leaves a wound in the collective mind of the force that loses it. Sailors who had once looked at the ship as a shield now saw it as a burning wreck. And that vision changes everything. Confidence becomes hesitation, courage becomes calculation, and decisions that were once made boldly now carry the weight of doubt. The Black Sea, which Russia once believed to be its stronghold, suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous, more unpredictable. Every ship still floating became a potential target. Every safe harbor became suspect, and every commander wondered if they might be next. That kind of tension wears down even the strongest military machine, grinding away at its efficiency, lowering its morale, and making every new mission feel like a risk. The timing of the strike magnified its impact even further. It was not done in the chaos of a major offensive or in the fog of a full-scale battle, but in a moment that caught the enemy off guard, amplifying the sense of vulnerability. Nighttime attacks have always had a special place in warfare because they carry with them the primal fear of the unknown. In darkness, imagination runs wild, and every shadow becomes a threat. The Black Sea that night became a trap, its dark waters hiding weapons that could strike at any moment. That knowledge seeps into the minds of every sailor and every officer, creating a constant pressure that does not go away when the sun rises. It was a reminder that technology and power cannot protect you from a well-planned strike. That vigilance must be constant. And that one moment of weakness can turn into disaster. Strategically, the destruction of the floating fortress forced Russia to rethink its naval operations in the region. The loss of such an asset is not just a single event, but a chain reaction that affects logistics, defense planning, and the morale of the entire fleet. Ships that were supposed to work in coordination with the fortress suddenly had to operate without its protection. Supply routes that depended on its presence had to be altered or reinforced, slowing down operations and creating new vulnerabilities. The enemy is forced into a defensive posture, spending more resources to protect what remains instead of projecting power outward. This shift gives Ukraine more freedom to act, more room to maneuver, and more opportunities to strike again. It is a ripple effect that keeps growing. And with every ripple, Russia's grip on the region becomes weaker. For Ukraine, this moment was more than a victory. It was proof of capability. a display to its own citizens and to the world that it could reach deep into enemy defenses and strike with precision. This kind of success builds momentum, strengthens alliances, and boosts morale at home. People fighting on the front lines feel the surge of confidence that comes from knowing their efforts are part of something effective, something that works. Citizens far from the front feel renewed hope that the war can still be turned. That victory is not a dream but a possibility. Internationally, it sends a message to allies that support is yielding results, encouraging them to continue or even increase their aid. For adversaries, it is a warning that Ukraine is not a passive player, but an active and dangerous force capable of changing the direction of the war in a single night. Russian commanders' overconfidence became their downfall, a trap they built for themselves without even realizing it. Overconfidence is one of the oldest enemies of any army, and in this case, it was the silent ally of Ukraine. The Russian commanders had grown used to thinking that their control of the sea was absolute, that their ships were untouchable, that the threat from the enemy was minimal. This kind of thinking does not happen overnight. It grows slowly, fed by small victories, by unchallenged patrols, by days and nights where nothing threatens their positions. Each safe day adds a brick to the wall of arrogance, until the wall becomes so high that they cannot see the danger beyond it. They believed the Black Sea was theirs, that their fortress was a shield that would stand no matter what. That belief led them to relax their guard, to celebrate openly, to gather together in one place without fear. They turned their own security into a weakness by making themselves predictable, and predictability is something no commander can afford in war. Overconfidence makes leaders forget that the enemy is watching, waiting, and adapting. Ukraine was not rushing into battle blindly but studying every move, every schedule, every pattern. The longer Russia acted as though the sea was safe, the more detailed Ukraine's knowledge became. Commanders who should have been scattered across their fleets, planning and maintaining vigilance were instead grouped together, convinced there was nothing to fear. This created the perfect opportunity for a strike that would not just damage a ship, but decapitate the chain of command in one blow. It was as if Russia had handed Ukraine the target on a silver platter. The tragedy for Russia is that it was entirely avoidable. A force that expects attack at any moment is difficult to surprise, but a force that believes it cannot be attacked is the easiest target in the world. When commanders become overconfident, their soldiers follow their lead. The mood on board likely matched the mood of the officers: relaxed, distracted, unworried. Such an atmosphere dulls reflexes and slows reactions. When the first missiles hit, the chaos that followed was worsened by the fact that few were mentally prepared for a fight. Surprise does not just break metal, it breaks nerves. People who believe they are safe take longer to shift into combat readiness, and in those precious seconds, destruction multiplies. This was not a battle between two equal forces meeting head-on. It was an ambush where one side was ready and the other side was not. That is why the strike was so devastating, why the fortress burned so quickly, why the casualties were so high. It was not just superior firepower that made the difference, but superior preparation. Overconfidence also blinded Russian leadership to the psychological war being waged against them. Every celebration was a signal, every visible movement a clue, and Ukraine was listening. By ignoring the possibility that their enemy could strike at such depth, they underestimated their enemy's reach and determination. That underestimation turned into disaster. History is filled with examples of armies that lost, not because they were weaker, but because they thought they were stronger than they really were. Overconfidence makes leaders dismiss intelligence warnings, overlook small risks, and delay necessary precautions. It makes them believe that time is on their side, when in fact time is being used against them. Ukraine turned Russia's relaxed schedule into a countdown, waiting until the moment of peak vulnerability before unleashing the attack that would tear through their illusions. The downfall of these commanders sends a lesson far beyond this single battle. Every surviving officer and sailor now carries the memory of what happened, and that memory is powerful. It tells them that their leaders can make mistakes, that their fleet is not untouchable, that celebrations can turn into funerals in seconds. This knowledge weighs on every decision they make afterward, creating hesitation where there used to be confidence. It forces them to be more cautious, to spread out their forces, to cancel gatherings, to change routines. Each of these changes slows their operations and makes them less efficient, giving Ukraine more space to act. The irony is that by being overconfident once, they must now live in a state of overcorrection, constantly guarding against a repeat of that night. This is how a single moment of arrogance can ripple across an entire campaign, altering its rhythm, its pace, and its outcome. This attack reshaped the balance of naval power in the region, taking what was once a theater dominated by Russian presence and turning it into contested waters, where every move must now be recalculated. Before this strike, the Black Sea was seen as a zone of Russian control, a place where their fleet could operate with confidence, project power, and intimidate both Ukraine and its allies. The floating fortress stood as a symbol of that dominance, acting as both shield and spear for Russia's naval ambitions. Its destruction removed not just a physical asset, but a psychological anchor, leaving the rest of the fleet exposed and forcing them to rethink every patrol, every mission, and every defensive posture. When a centerpiece of a naval strategy is suddenly gone, the entire formation must adapt, and adaptation under pressure is costly. Ships must be repositioned, defenses must be strengthened, and commanders must make decisions under the shadow of vulnerability. This slows operations, adds layers of caution, and reduces the ability to act aggressively, which is exactly what Ukraine needed. The balance of power is not just about the number of ships or the size of guns. It is about the perception of control. Once the enemy believes that their dominance is slipping, their decision-making begins to shift. Russia now must dedicate more resources to protecting what remains of its fleet, diverting attention from offensive operations and putting more focus on defense. Every convoy must now be escorted, every harbor must be reinforced, every radar must remain on high alert, draining energy and resources. The constant fear of another strike changes the rhythm of naval life. Sailors who once operated with routine confidence now work under the weight of expectation that at any moment another missile could come out of the night sky. This pressure grinds down morale over time, eroding the psychological edge that Russia once held for Ukraine. This shift opens new doors. A fleet that is hesitant and defensive is far easier to predict and manipulate. Ukraine can now apply pressure in new areas, forcing Russia to stretch its resources thinner, to respond to feints, to defend points that might not even be under threat. This creates opportunities for future strikes and puts Russia in a reactive position rather than an offensive one. War favors the side that can dictate the tempo, and by striking so effectively, Ukraine seized the tempo of operations in the region. Every subsequent action now carries the shadow of that first devastating attack, reminding the enemy that Ukraine has the capability to strike again. This psychological edge is as powerful as any weapon, because it forces Russia to think twice before taking risks. And hesitation in war can be fatal. The global impact of this attack is also significant. Naval power is not just about local dominance, but about signaling strength to the rest of the world. Allies and adversaries alike watch these events closely to judge who holds the upper hand. When a major asset is destroyed, it sends ripples through international perceptions, affecting diplomacy, alliances, and military planning. Ukraine's strike demonstrated that Russian naval power is not absolute, which may embolden other nations to challenge Russian influence or support Ukraine more openly. It also shows that even a fleet with superior numbers can be vulnerable if faced with a determined and intelligent opponent. This reshapes how analysts and planners around the world view the conflict, potentially influencing the flow of aid, the level of sanctions, and the posture of NATO forces in the region. At a more human level, the attack changes the morale of both sides. For Ukrainian fighters, it is a moment of pride. Proof that their struggle is not in vain, that they can hit hard and achieve results that matter on the global stage. It strengthens the resolve of a nation under siege, giving hope to civilians and fighters alike. For Russia, it is a moment of reckoning. A reminder that the war is not just a distant campaign, but a conflict that can reach deep into their operational heart. Each new mission must now be weighed with the memory of the floating fortress's destruction, and that memory will not fade quickly. Over time, this will shape behavior, forcing Russia into more conservative strategies and giving Ukraine more room to maneuver and strike at will.